The Empire stretched across thousands of stars, a machine of conquest that had never known defeat. Its fleets were vast, its armies countless, its rulers certain of their own supremacy. To them, every new world was the same: subjugation, assimilation, and silence. Victories came so easily that the notion of resistance seemed absurd. Pride had hardened into arrogance, and arrogance into blindness. When an alien general, a decorated veteran from a conquered frontier, was summoned to the High Council, they expected praise or submission. Instead, he gave them a warning. The warrior stood before them scarred, carrying the weight of campaigns fought against dozens of species. His words cut through the hall with a quiet conviction. He spoke of a new world on the fringe, a planet called Earth. He had faced its soldiers once, by accident rather than design, and had survived only because his superiors had ordered retreat. He told them that humanity was unlike anything the Empire had yet encountered. They fought not as disciplined ranks or with elaborate tactics alone, but with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Where other armies broke under pressure, humans endured. Where most enemies sought survival, humans sought retribution. He described one battle in chilling detail. A small detachment of human marines had been surrounded, their supplies cut, their chance of victory reduced to nothing. By all measures, they should have surrendered. Instead, they fought on. Wounded men refused to fall back, using their blood as bait to lure Imperial troops closer before detonating charges that turned themselves into weapons. Even when their position collapsed, they did not attempt to flee. They chose to drag their enemies into death with them. For every human that fell, 10 Imperial soldiers were lost. What should have been a minor skirmish turned into a massacre that haunted the survivors. The general's voice trembled with memory as he told the council that humanity did not fight like prey but like predators. "You believe yourselves invincible," he said. "But when you wrong them, they transform. They will not bow. They will not forgive. When they come for vengeance, it is without restraint. They will burn themselves to ash if it means taking you with them." His words carried no exaggeration, only the cold cadence of truth earned on the battlefield. Yet in the grand chamber of the Empire, his testimony drew laughter. The council mocked him openly. To them, humans were primitive, a young race with crude fleets, barely beginning to grasp the mechanics of interstellar travel. How could such a species threaten the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever known? They dismissed his warnings as superstition, a relic of a warrior's pride damaged by defeat. Some suggested he exaggerated to excuse his failures. Others scoffed that humans were merely another savage race that would be tamed, broken, and folded into the Empire like all the rest. But the warrior's eyes did not waver. He repeated his message, slower this time, with grim finality. "You mistake their kindness for weakness. You mistake their patience for fear. You mistake their silence for submission. But when you draw their blood, you will awaken something you cannot contain. You call yourselves gods. They will show you what demons are." The chamber quieted for a moment at his words, not out of belief, but from the raw conviction behind them. Yet the silence broke again into dismissive laughter, and the matter was closed. His warning was recorded as nothing more than a footnote, irrelevant against the tidal momentum of conquest. As the council adjourned, the alien warrior knew he had done all he could. His species had already been broken under Imperial rule, and he bore no loyalty to humanity. His warning had not been given for Earth's sake, but for the Empire's. He had seen what humans were capable of when cornered, and he understood a truth that none of the rulers wanted to hear. Some enemies could not be ruled through fear, because fear only sharpened them. Some enemies could not be bought, because the insult of betrayal burned hotter than greed. Humanity was not the strongest, nor the most advanced, but they were the most relentless. Once provoked, they did not stop. The Empire's lords never noticed the silence in his final bow, nor the way he turned away without ceremony. They never saw the faint shadow of pity in his eyes, pity not for the humans but for the Empire itself. He left the chamber with the certainty of a soldier who had witnessed the storm on the horizon. Behind him, the rulers of the galaxy continued to boast of their invincibility, blind to the prophecy they had just mocked into dismissal. In their laughter, the seeds of their ruin were already sown. For years after Earth entered galactic politics, humans believed cooperation would bring them security. Their world had only recently stretched its reach to the stars, their fleets smaller, their technology lagging behind, but their pride remained intact. They sought trade, exchange, and recognition, hoping that strength of character could balance their lack of power. The Empire saw something else entirely. To them, Earth was a resource to be stripped, a culture to be mocked, a people too naive to recognize chains being fastened around their necks. The treaties forced upon humanity were not agreements but dictates. Minerals were seized at prices far below their worth, taxes imposed on colonies that could barely sustain themselves. Human officials protested, but every petition was dismissed with cold indifference. When human representatives raised their voices in the grand assemblies, their words were drowned in laughter or ignored outright. Cultural achievements, history, and art were treated as trivial curiosities unworthy of respect. The message was clear: humans were tolerated, not valued. Discontent simmered beneath the surface. Soldiers whispered of unfair contracts that left their colonies defenseless. Citizens grumbled at the sight of imperial envoys walking Earth's soil as though it were conquered land. Yet still, humanity endured. They had known centuries of hardship on their own planet. They could bear insult if it meant survival. But survival was not what the Empire sought. Pride demanded domination, and domination demanded blood. The breaking point came swiftly. On the distant frontier, in a colony of families and miners, imperial forces arrived under the pretense of enforcing order. A minor dispute with an imperial merchant had escalated, and the governor had dared to resist imperial threats. Troops descended without negotiation. Homes were burned, civilians executed in the streets, and the settlement erased as an example. Thousands perished before any message could reach Earth. The massacre was recorded as disciplinary action in imperial archives, a routine suppression of unrest. When the news reached humanity, it struck like a thunderclap. Broadcasts of smoldering ruins and mass graves spread across every nation. Mothers wept over images of children slaughtered for defiance. Soldiers clenched their fists, staring at the uniforms of the dead. Politicians who once urged restraint fell silent before the fury of their people. For the first time in centuries, humanity spoke with a single voice. The Empire had not killed rebels or soldiers. It had slaughtered settlers, families who only wanted to live free. The line had been crossed, and there would be no forgiveness. Anger was not confined to governments. Ordinary men and women demanded vengeance. Workers volunteered for military service. Factories shifted production to arms with unprecedented speed. Veterans returned to drill new recruits. Scientists poured their genius into weapons programs long considered too dangerous or impractical. Every insult, every theft, every dismissal now carried weight, and the massacre bound it all into one unbearable wound. The wound did not fester, it hardened into resolve. In the chambers of Earth's leadership, arguments ceased. No party, no faction, no border divided them. The memory of the murdered colony erased hesitation. It was no longer a question of diplomacy but of survival through retribution. Humanity's leaders did not declare open war immediately. They knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and dismissed by the galaxy. Instead, they turned inward, preparing in silence. Production quotas tripled, training camps multiplied, and colonies began stockpiling resources in secret. The Empire watched with casual amusement. Their intelligence networks reported the activity but dismissed it as feudal posturing. To them, humans were still an inferior race, unworthy of notice. The notion that Earth could rise against the weight of thousands of imperial worlds seemed impossible. And so, when emissaries carried pleas for justice, they were ignored. When families of the slaughtered begged for recognition of their dead, they were mocked. Imperial governors sneered, calling humans emotional, irrational, incapable of accepting their place. Yet in the shadows of their laughter, humanity was transforming. What had been scattered grievances was now a united vow. Soldiers swore oaths not of defense, but of vengeance. Engineers dreamed not of efficiency, but of destruction. Generals no longer trained for border skirmishes but for total war. Each insult became fuel, each grave a reminder, each silence a drumbeat of inevitability. And so the vow was sealed: if the Empire wanted obedience, it would face defiance; if it wanted fear, it would face fury; if it wanted submission, it would face vengeance. Humanity would not strike recklessly, but when they did, it would not be measured or polite. They would fight until the stars themselves bore witness. The Empire believed the storm would never come. Humanity had already decided that when it did, it would never end until the galaxy remembered what it meant to wrong them. The Empire had expected capitulation. It had seen dozens of races attempt resistance, only to be crushed beneath the weight of overwhelming force. When humanity refused to submit, Imperial commanders anticipated a swift and effortless campaign. Fleets were dispatched with pomp and certainty, their officers already imagining the commendations awaiting them. They believed Earth would crumble in weeks, its colonies shattered, its people begging for mercy. Instead, they found an enemy who did not play by their rules. The first engagements confused the Empire. Human ships lacked the scale and polish of Imperial vessels, yet they fought with a precision that seemed reckless to anyone else. Rather than facing superior numbers in direct confrontation, humans scattered and struck from the shadows. Convoys vanished without warning. Patrols reported false signals before being ambushed from behind asteroids. Entire supply chains collapsed as freighters were hijacked and turned into improvised weapons. Every advance was met not with open resistance but with traps that cost the Empire dearly. Imperial analysts grew frustrated as casualty reports arrived. To them, the numbers made no sense. How could a fleet with inferior technology inflict such losses? Investigations revealed the truth. Humans had studied every recorded battle the Empire had ever fought. They knew where the Empire relied on routine, where arrogance bred carelessness. Where most enemies fought to survive, humans fought to break patterns, to dismantle confidence itself. They adapted at a speed the Empire had never encountered. Tactics that worked once were abandoned the next day. What appeared to be desperation was cold calculation. On the ground, the effect was even more harrowing. Human soldiers fought with a tenacity the Empire could neither predict nor match. Wounded troops refused evacuation, choosing to fight until their last breath. Squads cut off from command turned into guerrilla cells, harassing garrisons until entire units collapsed. Night raids, sabotage, and psychological warfare spread terror among Imperial forces and used to such relentlessness. They whispered of enemies who did not sleep, who did not fear, who returned after being thought dead. The stories grew until soldiers dreaded being deployed against them. One battle shifted perception entirely. The Empire had committed a major armada to encircle a human fleet near a barren system. Outnumbered and outgunned, the humans feigned retreat, scattering into what seemed like a chaotic flight. The Imperials pursued with confidence, only to realize too late that they had been herded into a grave. Mines concealed in asteroid belts ignited as the trap closed. Human warships, once thought fleeing, reappeared from hiding positions, cutting supply ships apart first, then hammering command vessels. In the span of hours, what was meant to be a showcase of Imperial superiority turned into annihilation. An entire fleet, considered invincible, was reduced to wreckage drifting through silence. Survivors spoke of the chilling precision with which humans had orchestrated the ambush. It was not luck nor desperation, but strategy born of a willingness to sacrifice everything. Imperial admirals could not comprehend such thinking. To humans, ships were tools, not treasures. Soldiers embraced death if it meant breaking the enemy's spine. The idea of victory without survival was alien to the Empire but second nature to humanity. For the first time in generations, the Empire faced something it could not dismiss. Its commanders argued, its counselors whispered, its soldiers hesitated. The invincible machine of conquest had struck a wall, and that wall bled but did not fall. Each loss was explained away as an accident or anomaly, but the pattern grew undeniable. Where other species broke, humanity hardened. Where others surrendered, humanity counterattacked. The more the Empire pressed, the more ferocious the resistance became. Among the conquered species, stories spread quickly. The galaxy that had once laughed at humanity began to watch in silence. Rumors traveled of imperial fleets turned to ash, of soldiers driven mad by relentless foes, of an enemy who refused to fear the greatest power in existence. Whispers turned into awe. For the oppressed, humanity became a symbol. For the Empire, they became a nightmare. Through it all, the old alien warrior who had warned the Council watched in grim silence. He alone was not surprised. He had told them what would happen if they provoked humanity. Now he heard the echoes of his prophecy in every battle report, in every desperate plea for reinforcements. His words had been dismissed as paranoia, yet the evidence was carved into the wreckage of fleets. The Empire had woken an enemy unlike any it had ever faced, and the storm had only begun. The Empire had expected resistance to fade after the first defeats, yet what followed was something far more terrifying. Humanity did not simply repel invasions. They carried the war deep into imperial space. Where once they had fought defensively, they now advanced with relentless purpose. Entire sectors that had known only imperial banners suddenly burned with uprisings, their flames kindled by human sabotage. Supply routes once thought untouchable were gutted overnight. Fortresses designed to withstand sieges for years collapsed in weeks under a style of warfare that was merciless and unrelenting. Human fleets struck where the enemy least expected. They bypassed fortified worlds to strike at production yards, crippling the Empire's ability to replenish its losses. They infiltrated communication networks, turning orders into chaos, fleets into disorganized masses without direction. Where the Empire relied on order, humans thrived in disorder. They dismantled the machine piece by piece, each strike sharper and bolder than the last. What unsettled the Empire most was not merely the destruction, but the refusal to spare anyone deemed complicit. Garrisons who surrendered found themselves executed. Governors who begged for negotiation were put on trial before their citizens, every sentence carried out in public. Human vengeance spared no uniform, no official, no servant of the regime. The galaxy watched in horror as broadcasts of these reprisals spread, the images impossible to suppress. What had been dismissed as weakness was now feared as fury without boundary. Imperial soldiers began to break. Many had been raised in the belief that the Empire was invincible, that resistance was futile, that no opponent could endure against their power. To confront an enemy who not only endured but answered cruelty with cruelty shook their very foundation. Stories spread through the ranks of human troops who fought even when mortally wounded, of officers who detonated themselves to destroy command posts, of colonies that rose in flames rather than surrender. These stories grew into legends, and legends into terror. Fear traveled faster than orders, eroding discipline before battles even began. The Council tried to contain this spreading panic with proclamations of control. They declared human victories exaggerated, their ferocity the product of propaganda. Yet the evidence could not be hidden. Entire fleets were gone. Colonies once under imperial banners now flew the sigil of Earth. Resource worlds critical to the war machine were stripped away. What the Empire could not admit openly became undeniable in private chambers. They were losing ground, and losing it to a species they had once considered beneath notice. Diplomats were dispatched in secret to test the possibility of compromise. Promises of autonomy, trade, and leniency were offered, but humanity answered with silence or contempt. The wounds of the massacre had never healed, and every new act of defiance hardened their resolve. They no longer sought recognition or equality. They sought punishment. The human creed became simple and absolute: no mercy, no surrender, no forgiveness. The turning point came when humans reclaimed the colony that had been massacred. The ruins had been left as a warning by the Empire, a reminder of its dominance. Humanity transformed it into a monument of vengeance. Imperial officers captured there were forced to confess their crimes in broadcasts transmitted across the stars. Their executions followed, carried out with precision and without hesitation. The message was not just for the Empire but for the galaxy. There would be no forgetting, and there would be no escape. Across conquered worlds, whispers grew louder. If humanity could wound the Empire so deeply, perhaps others could rise as well. Species once silent in their chains began to stir. Uprisings broke out in corners of the galaxy thought pacified for centuries, each one inspired by the knowledge that the Empire could bleed. Humanity had become more than an enemy, they had become a spark. Through it all, the alien warrior who had given his warning watched with grim recognition. He had said they would not stop, that vengeance would consume them, and now his words were carved into the reality of every battlefield. The Empire's pride had turned into its weakness, and humanity had transformed insult into fire. The galaxy no longer laughed at them. It whispered in fear, waiting to see how far their wrath would reach, and whether anything would be left standing when it was spent. The Empire gathered its strength for one final blow. From every corner of its domain, ships were summoned, soldiers conscripted, and resources drained. The result was the greatest armada ever assembled, a fleet so vast it eclipsed stars when it moved. It was proclaimed as the Invincible Fleet, the hammer that would end the defiance of Earth once and for all. To the rulers, this was more than a campaign. It was a declaration that their supremacy remained unchallenged. Confidence returned to their voices as they promised the galaxy that humanity's end was inevitable. Humanity did not cower. They watched the growing force with cold calculation, understanding that this was the moment they had been preparing for since the first blood had been spilled. Every scientist, every soldier, every leader had focused on this confrontation. They did not intend to match the Empire in numbers or size. They intended to shatter the myth that had bound the galaxy for centuries. To them, the Invincible Fleet was not a threat, it was an opportunity. The battle began at the edge of a desolate system chosen deliberately by human commanders. Imperial admirals expected a desperate defense, but what they faced was something far darker. The humans had seeded the system with traps weeks in advance, asteroid belts mined with warheads, hidden outposts primed with self-destruct charges, and entire derelict vessels rigged to explode. Every advance the Empire made triggered devastation. Supply ships vanished in sudden detonations, frigates collided with debris fields intentionally guided into their path, and communications dissolved under waves of interference. As confusion spread, human fleets emerged not to challenge head-on, but to divide. They struck the support lines first, obliterating fuel carriers and medical ships. They targeted command vessels with surgical precision, leaving the vast armada blinded. Where the Empire saw chaos, humans saw orchestration. Every sacrifice was planned, every loss a step toward unraveling their enemy. Ships were driven into suicidal charges not out of desperation but design, ramming capital vessels to cripple their engines before detonating. Entire wings vanished in coordinated explosions that turned the void into a killing field. Imperial soldiers had been told their enemies would break under overwhelming numbers. Instead, they faced an enemy that embraced annihilation if it meant victory. Human pilots flew damaged craft until they burst into fire, aiming their destruction at the heart of enemy formations. Ground teams boarded dreadnoughts with no intention of escape, tearing apart reactors even as they died. The Empire was forced to confront a reality it had never prepared for. Humanity did not measure success in survival, but in destruction. The Invincible Fleet faltered. Command fractured as admirals argued over strategy, their confidence collapsing with each unexpected blow. Morale disintegrated as ships once thought untouchable burned before their eyes. The galaxy watched in silence as reports leaked of the impossible, Earth's outnumbered forces dismantling the mightiest fleet ever conceived. What began as an assured triumph turned into a rout, and what was meant to cement the Empire's dominance instead carved its humiliation into history. When the last flagship fell, detonated from within by human commandos, the silence across the Empire was deafening. Worlds that had cheered the departure of the Invincible Fleet now whispered in dread, wondering if their masters had lost their grip forever. The myth of supremacy was broken, not by parity of strength, but by willpower that no calculation could measure. The Empire sued for peace, not out of choice but necessity. Their fleets were crippled, their resources drained, their soldiers terrified of facing humanity again. They offered concessions, treaties, and apologies, hoping to salvage what dignity remained. Humanity did not accept their words lightly. The memory of the massacre, and every betrayal that followed still burned. The settlements rebuilt their graves into monuments, their children raised not with sorrow but with the lesson that vengeance had been answered. For the galaxy, the war had redrawn reality. No longer was Earth a minor world to be dismissed. They had shown that strength was not only measured in numbers or technology, but in an unyielding refusal to submit. Species once cowed into silence began to rise, emboldened by the example. Humanity had proven that the Empire could bleed, and more importantly, that it could fall. The alien warrior who had once given his warning lived to see the prophecy fulfilled. He had told the rulers they would awaken demons if they shed human blood. Now he stood among the ruins of imperial arrogance, knowing his words had been truth. The Empire had laughed, but laughter had turned to screams, then to silence. Humanity had carved its place into the stars with fire and steel, leaving no doubt of what it meant to wrong them. They had been underestimated, mocked, and provoked, but in the end, it was their enemies who learned that when Earth's soldiers take revenge, there is no mercy.